So today, like I said, we're going to be looking at helping our learners to learn, looking at feedback, and we're going to try and look at different types of assessment, right, David?
Yeah, that's right. The idea is to take a look at assessment, not so much in the case of sort of external written assessment, like the Cambridge exams or whatever, but the sort of assessment that you do every day in class, and how you can build that into the learning process. Okay, so we're going to start off by looking at the types of assessment that we have available and see a little bit how they differ and how they worked in the same way. Then we'll take a look at feedback, which is perhaps the most basic and informal type of assessment that we do. And then we'll generally have a look at see how feedback and assessment works through the classroom and how we can bring it into the learning process.
So I will ask, please do share opinions, ideas, thoughts, and comments. We love to hear everything you have to say. I'll make sure that we can see everybody's comments, and I'll read them out as well as much as I can. But on that note, we're going to turn our cameras off just for connections issues, just to make sure that everybody can stay connected without any problems with the internet. So just turn off now and we'll get cracking, I think, David, right?
Yep. I just managed to mute myself instead of turning my camera off. So it's lucky that Mark's driving today.
Excellent. All right, then. So how can assessment support teaching and learning?
Yeah, we're going to take a look just at the beginning, as I said, at different types of assessment and how they relate to learning. I'm going to start off with the next slide, looking at the types or the reasons why we might assess. So first of all, these are all sort of typical terms, typical names for different types of assessment. Some of us make to find a distinction between them, and I think sometimes they do the same job. So we start off with the placement test as a type of assessment, and that's usually or is always done at the beginning of a learning journey, and it's usually used to decide what class to put a new learner in. So it's to evaluate what level the student has at the beginning of the learning process. Summative assessment is what we often assume is all assessment. It's the most typical type of assessment, I think, for particularly here in Spain, which is just giving a mark. So summative assessment typically comes at the end of a learning process, and it's designed to check whether outcomes have been met. And typically it does that by showing a level or a grade, rather than giving more detailed feedback, perhaps. Then we've got diagnostic assessment. Diagnostic assessment is sort of similar to placement tests, but it happens during the course of the learning journey. And it helps you to give more detailed feedback to the students, and it allows teachers to decide what to do next. So you might think that your students you've done a unit, you need to decide whether they understand the unit, and if they don't understand the unit, which bits they didn't understand, and those bits you can then give more weight to or work on again going forward. Similarly, formative assessment is assessment which is designed to help teachers, again, check what learning has happened and check what needs the learners still have. So where do they still need help? And in that case, it's very similar to diagnostic testing. And then, of course, we've got learning assessment as learning or assessment for learning, which is an attempt to see assessment as an integral part of the learning cycle. Now, I would say here that there's there's a lot of debate sometimes about whether we should have summative assessment or formative assessment. There's a lot of argument, including even among people in my own team who are assessment people. The truth is, although we make a very clear distinction between formative assessment, which is giving feedback, and summative assessment, which is giving a mark at the end, if we're thinking of learning as a cycle, and I think at the moment we're moving into a period, the future, where we are looking to promote lifelong learning, and people will continue to learn all the way through their lives. I think there isn't an end to learning. So even a summative test at the end of a period of learning will provide information which is valid for the student when they go forward into their next period of learning. So all assessment is informing learning. All assessment is giving students information to help them design their learning as they go forward. And as I say, I think we need to start thinking of learning as a cycle much more than as the typical learning pathway or the typical learning road. It's much more cyclical.
Yeah, it's more about the process rather than just having specific road marks, isn't it? It's all one. It's all continuous.
That's right. And as such, and whenever you get a mark or whenever you get feedback of any type, that's designed to help you improve in the next steps. Okay. Let's have a look now at ways in which we can assess. And I think there are no big surprises here. This one's very close to my heart, but tends to annoy students. The typical formal external written assessments, like the exams from Cambridge, typically done at the end of a course. But there are many other types of assessment which we can have. For example, teacher assessment. As teachers, you're assessing your students all the time. You might be setting homework and correcting it. You might give them a quick test in class or a quiz. And you can do this either summatively or formatively. You can give them a grade, or you can just give them feedback, whatever works for your students. But it's something you're doing all the time. We can also take the weight off the teacher, and we can have learners assess each other's work in peer assessment. And again, this can be either formative, or it can be assessment for learning or as learning. As well as peer assessment, students can assess their own work. They can learn to think critically about what they've done, analyze their performance, and see where they need to improve at any one time. And finally, we'll have a brief look at this later. Something which isn't very common here in Spain, but has been used quite a lot in the UK, which is portfolio assessment, where the learners take responsibility for choosing the pieces of work which they want to count towards their assessment. Now, obviously, you need to work with them to do that, but it's very useful to give them an active role in their own assessment. Okay. Now, obviously, today we're looking at all assessment in the classroom, so we're going to forget about external written assessment, much as it hurts, and we're going to focus on these other types. But first of all, we're going to have a look at the most general type of assessment which we ever give our students, and the most informal type of assessment, which is feedback. And I don't know whether do you want to ask them a question here, Mark?
Yeah, sure. So really the big question is, what is good feedback? What do you think is good feedback? Yeah. When you are in your class and you're with your kids, what type of feedback do you think they want? Or put it the other way around, what for you is good feedback? When you were a student and you were in your classes, what type of feedback did you want? Yeah. So if you'd like to share in the chat box with us.
Yeah, I can see some people are still set to host some panelists, which is a pity. If you have a look down at the bottom of the chat box where you're going to actually write your message, there's a little little tab there which says to, and I think it's set by default to hosts and panelists, but you can select a drop-down menu there and change it to everyone. If you could change it to everyone, that way everybody can see everybody's comments.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, you learn. I'm sure you learn more from the chat box than you actually learn from us. So, or from me at least.
No, definitely from me.
So it's really useful if everybody can see what everybody's putting in the chat box.
Yeah. So if you just have a go at sharing some ideas, I'm sure you've all got great ideas out there, or at least something to say. Good feedback. And what does it mean for you? I know, for example, from my own context, when I was going to Spanish lessons, trying to learn to speak some level of Spanish, I always found constant feedback. Really, I liked it to be consistent. I never like to be let go. I know we need to build confidence, but in my case, I always like to be told when I'm making a mistake and how I can fix it.
Okay, brilliant, Maria Elena. Thank you very much.
Good. Yes, so Maria Elena, who said, good feedback for me is reminding them what they did right and also telling them how they can improve. That's really nice. Show enthusiasm for classroom activities. Like, I prefer using positive feedback. Yeah, exactly, Dolores.
Yeah, Dolores, can you change your setting to everyone rather than hosts and panelists, please? Because you shared a really nice idea there. It's just a pity that nobody else is going to see it. Excellent.
Yeah, so feedback is about that, and we've got some beautiful keywords here as well. I think positive, telling them what they did right is a really nice point, and
yeah. There's Maria Teresa, the one that makes you go ahead and assume that you are able to go on learning. That's nice. It's supporting.
Yeah.
Imma, I'm going to disagree with you, I think, in a minute. Encourage them to keep working and telling them, well done, you can do it, etc.
It's good. I like that. Bit of a discussion to come up then, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to try not to be too controversial here, I think.
Excellent. Should we jump on them?
Yeah, let's go for it. So, what is good feedback? Well, here was some ideas that we came up with. Good feedback has to be clear. If you don't understand the feedback, or if it's too long, you can't assimilate it, and if you can't assimilate it, then it's a waste of time. And include examples. Show them exactly what you're talking about. It also needs to be focused. Sometimes there's a lot of things that you can see in a student's work. Particularly imagine that you're giving feedback on a piece of speaking that they've just done. You've waited until the end because we're giving them fluency, we're giving them space, and then you want to go through what they did. Sometimes they've made lots and lots of mistakes in that piece of work. You need to be clear about what the aim of the activity was and focus on the aim of the activity. Maybe don't pick up things which they could improve, which were outside the scope of the activity. Because if you give them too many things again, it's like giving feedback which is too long. It just doesn't work. They become overwhelmed. There are too many things. They switch off. So focus maybe on the most important points or the biggest problems, the things that they really can't go ahead and in life without correcting. And finally, and this is something that everybody said, make it positive and constructive. However, and I do need to pick up what Imma said here. For me, probably the worst type of feedback, apart from obviously negative feedback, the worst type of feedback is the typical good job, well done. Because if you just limit yourself to good job, the student thinks, yeah, they feel good, but it's completely random and they can't replicate what they did well. You need to identify what they did well. You need to pick out exactly what it was that made it that they did a good job.
Yeah, you're talking about being very specific and giving them something that's measurable to them, isn't it? It's about
that's it. Because they need to replicate that. If you give them feedback, they need to know what was right, and that way they know what they can do again. If you just say good job, hey, I feel great, but I can't replicate that. So what do I do next time to make sure you say good job again? So we really need to think about that. Saying great, you can do it, well done, is fantastic because it helps them to feel good with themselves, but it doesn't constitute feedback. It's psychological support.
Which has a place. Of course, it has a place.
Of course, it has. Yeah, I mean, as an examiner for the young learners exams, for example, we're encouraged to give positive reinforcement, but positive reinforcement isn't feedback. Yeah, it's just as I say, emotional support, which is useful. Okay.
Nice.
So, where are we going next?
We talked about giving feedback effectively.
Yeah. So if we want to give feedback effectively, the first thing we need to do is set clear aims for the task. Now, it says here to help learners, but actually, if we set clear aims for the task, it also helps us as teachers when we want to give feedback. Because if the aims are clear, then we know exactly where to go to look for the information we need to give them as feedback. If we're giving clear aims, then we make sure that the work they're sending is as good as it can be, because they're clear about what they have to do and they know what good looks like. And it also enables them and us to identify when they're not meeting the success criteria. And it helps them to communicate this to you, so they can come to you and say, I have a problem with this. I'm not sure about this. I need your help with this and this and this. I'm not sure if I've met those aims or those success criteria. Okay. And we can also give them model examples to show them what good looks like. So if you're asking them to do a piece of writing, it's often quite nice to give them a model text to look at and to analyze before they produce their own. Okay. Yeah. And that way they can compare theirs with a proper example, a good example, for example. Sorry, Mark.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to expand on that. What I like about model text or model examples, I do like to do them from previous learners I've had or from peers of a similar age to them. Because when we get a good model from their peers, it has to obviously meet the criteria of what we want to achieve, but it's more accessible to them because they're more likely to see it as something that they could achieve. It's not something written by a child in England, for example, who maybe is obviously native, etc., etc. It's more realistic to them, and it's going to be often written in a way, in a text, for example, it's going to be written in a way that's more easily accessible, I tend to think, because the language is similar to what they have studied, what they learned. Their vocabulary is going to be more or less similar.
Yeah, so, and just as a model, the writer then becomes a role model for your students. You say, no, this is somebody who's of your age, living here in Spain. They're not that different from you. So if they can achieve this, you can achieve it. So that's a really good point. Yeah.
Nice. Method is on the same page as us with this one. Yeah, she says showing examples from their peers, anything taken from a book is not so inspiring. I would beg to disagree with that, but but obviously the peer work is always much more entertaining, isn't it? It's much more engaging. It's more realistic. It's more relevant, which is what we're aiming for at the end of the day.
Though you may, of course, need to anonymize stuff if you're using things from people from other classes who the students might know. Mm-hmm. Okay. So anyway, we're going to move on to have a look at more, shall we say, formal assessment, although we're still in the classroom. And we're going to have a look at teacher assessment. Now, you're the experts in teacher assessment, so I wanted to throw a few questions at you. So first of all, question number 1, should you always correct everything? Another question, when do you assess? Should you always assess in the same way? And when you assess, what do you want to achieve? And again, is it always the same? I'm conscious that we don't have a massive amount of time here, but I'd just like you to maybe pick one of them and just drop an answer in the chat box, because you get some really interesting answers from here. Just as a teacher assessing, do you always correct everything? When do you assess? Do you always assess in the same way? What do you want to achieve with your assessment?
Nice. Yeah. So just think about your own teaching context when you're thinking about assessing your learners from a teacher's perspective. Choose one of these questions and give us a bit of feedback.
I would also say that these are maybe questions you need to take away with you. And when you're thinking about, when you're planning your work, planning your classes or your units or whatever, maybe have these in the back of your mind. So as you're planning your unit, what are you going to assess? Are you going to correct everything? At what points of the unit are you going to assess? And do you assess in the same way? And when you're assessing, what do you want to achieve? Some people are writing some very long texts, I think. Either that, they've already gone off for a cup of tea.
Maybe the kettle boiled at exactly the moment we asked the questions.
Yeah, often happens. Maria Elena, I personally don't correct everything. Try to focus on what we're practicing. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of leaning towards that debate, isn't it? Of fluency over, oh, I've forgotten the other term now.
Accuracy.
Accuracy. Thank you very so much. Yeah, it's a fluency accuracy, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's nice.
And also, you know, it's the question when you take in a piece of writing and you just cover it in red pen or purple pen or pink pen, but you just cover it, and the kids, you know, maybe invested some time and effort in it, and it becomes slightly demoralizing. Whereas if you focus on specific aims, then you can reduce the amount of pen that you're using, and you can reduce the impact of your correction on their work, but you're focusing on what they're doing. Mercedes, when dealing with grammar or writing, I do correct everything, or try to. However, when students are speaking, I only rephrase things which are not understandable. Yes, so that's sort of accuracy in writing, fluency in speaking. Dolores, I assess essays, but not when they're speaking. Everything but different depending on what you want to achieve. Feedback is necessary all the time to move on different levels. And Carmen, who's set on hosts and panelists, when students are developing their skills, I don't correct everything. I let them be more free, considering mistakes as part of their own improvement. Yeah, that's a good point.
I like that. Yeah, I also just want to bring up one comment here is, should you always correct everything? And I think you should. I think we should be very aware of correction. I like the term feedback, as was mentioned here. Feedback is necessary all the time. Correction maybe not always, but it's also important to think about the who of the feedback as well. And we don't just want to be giving feedback on those who are struggling in the class. We want to be giving feedback on everybody in the class. That's always an important point to take.
That matches with what Mercedes is saying as well. She says, I also try to highlight their best points. Exactly. So often we focus only on the negative. And then when you come to think about maybe what we do in Cambridge when we're marking, and we're giving credit for what people can do rather than punishing what they can't do, it becomes more difficult to understand how the thinking behind our marking system. Do you always assess at the end? Or do you assess during the process? That's sort of the when do you assess?
And the chat box here, when do you assess? Do you at the end? Yeah, nice. Mercedes says at the end. Anyone else?
During and at the end, yeah. So I think when we were putting these questions together, I think it turned out that there is a sort of chain going through these questions. So when do you assess? You can assess at different points during the process, but you won't always be assessing in the same way. We'll be looking at an example of this at the end of the session, at sort of how you can introduce assessment in different points in an activity. And you need to know, as always, you know, what you want to achieve before you could do your assessment, and before you decide on the type of assessment you're going to use. If you need a grade at the end of it, and we all need grades at the end of a piece of work, then, you know, we do need to assess in a particular way. Whereas if we don't need a grade and we need to find feedback, then we will assess in a very different way. Similarly, if we correct everything, we don't leave anything for the students to think about and come back and repeat. So they maybe learn less if we correct everything. But if we highlight what they need to correct and give them time and space for it to go away and correct it, then maybe we're helping them more, and we're supporting them more as autonomous learners. But anyway, let's push on. So we dedicate a little bit of time to this. So, rhetorical question: how do you decide what to assess? And the answer is lots of things. Sometimes it seems very obvious to say, okay, you know, what do we assess? Well, we assess the content, but there's so much more to what your students are doing than just the content. So I don't know, Mark, if you want to go through some of these.
Yeah, for sure. So on this slide, I mean, a lot of these words you're going to be familiar with, obviously, and possibly you're already going to be doing a bit of assessment on them. You know, there are lots of areas within them that are really important. And I'm kind of going to bring it a bit across to LOMLOE more specifically now, just to look at this, because you'll notice that in the guides that we've seen so far, collaboration is very important, participation is very important, and also interest in learning is very important. And on top of that, we've got it kind of all put into the category of curiosity and about other cultures and cultural learning and interculturalness and these type of terms, you know. So what I'm saying is that there are many ways of experiencing learning, and we need to be offering the opportunities for learners to demonstrate in these different categories. And the hard thing is, well, how do we know what to assess? No, like what we know, we can assess this, we can assess their interest in learning, but what are we assessing? It's easy to say it, but there has to be some sort of practical thing. And we're going to be looking at that a bit as well. I don't know if there's any other sort of areas we could dive into specifically here. I don't know if you have any thoughts, David.
No, I think it's clear. It's just that we need to get away from just assessing the content and just assessing learning as a product, because what we really need to assess is learning as a process. Yeah. So we need to be assessing the effort that they're putting in and the way that they're improving, rather than just marking them against a full scale.
Yeah.
And I agree, Sonia, it is very difficult to assess objectively, but there are ways of doing it. I know that there was a lot of talk a few years ago about assessing using rubrics. And you can measure this sort of thing using rubrics. And you can measure this reasonably objectively if you write the rubric carefully enough. Okay, so just what are the things that you want them to achieve, and then have them show evidence for that.
Also, when we talk about assessing these objectives, another thing to remember here is these are more specifically linked to competencies more than it is to content. And when we talk about like assessing competencies, we tend to see them appear in the process much more than in the final product. And that's just another thing to keep in mind, that these won't appear at the end. You know, you can't really evaluate collaboration in the quality of the final project or product. You know, you have to be aware of it as you're going along, and you can see and measure and understand a bit better. As long as was mentioned earlier, we set clear expectations, the learners know what they have to do to achieve a good mark.
Yeah.
Should we jump on?
Yeah. So, you know, how do we make it useful for our students? How do we I've forgotten the original question now. How do you decide what to assess? The key for any assessment is to keep it relevant. If your students don't understand what you're using, the tools that you're using, and why you're using them, they won't understand the assessment, and therefore they get nothing from it. You can experiment. And I think are you all teaching in secondary? Go into your class tomorrow and give 6 of your students blue stickers and tell them that that's an assessment. I can guarantee it won't make any difference to their learning. It won't make any difference to anything. They'll just look at you as if you're mad, because they don't understand what a blue sticker means. You haven't explained it to them. They just don't get it. When I was first teaching, I was teaching the upper end of infants. I was teaching 5-year-olds and beginning of primary 6-year-olds. And I had colleagues who were insisting on giving them grades with decimal points. So Paquito, oh yeah, he got a 7.3. And they'd put it on his work. You know, Paquito would go home with a 7.3 written on his work. And he didn't understand decimal numbers. He only really sort of understood whole numbers. So a 7.3 meant nothing. He couldn't even read it. So what's the point in giving them that feedback, giving them that assessment? It doesn't help them. So yeah, please keep your tools relevant, and if you don't think that they understand them, then explain them. It take time. So for example, here's an example of something that we could do with our students on the next slide. This is you'll often see these used for behavior, particularly if there's a student who has a particular behavioral challenge. You know, quite often the orientación team will give them a little self diagnostic table where they can judge what they've done each day. Now we can borrow this and we can give them objectives. So for example, here we've got classroom objectives. So for example, I can help my classmates understand the task. I can listen respectfully to the teacher. In fact, it leads into the this month I'm going to. So this month I'm going to help my classmates. This month I'm going to listen respectfully. This month I'm going to be honest and open. This month I'm going to contribute to my group work. And this month I'm going to help keep the group work on track. And it's sort of like a contract with the student, if we're using it to modify behavior. But we can use it to help them measure their own work or to help them negotiate their progress with you. Now, you can do this with smiley faces. For older students, smiley faces sometimes feel a little bit childish. So instead of doing that, we give them grades 0 to 5. You might want to get rid of the 0. And here each day they put the date in. They have to choose a grade for them for each of these ideas. And then they have to also justify it. Give me an example. Why did you give yourself this grade today? And then it has to be correlated with what the teacher feels. Okay.
I like this as well, because it's not just about children evaluating themselves who maybe aren't behaving appropriately in class. It's also to allow children who are doing things well to evaluate themselves and say, well, yes, I already do this and I am doing it well and I'm doing it properly and it's being recognized. You know, I already listen respectfully to the teacher. I do that well, and this is how I do it. You know, it's reinforcing positive behaviors, not just attempting to raise awareness of negative behaviors.
Yeah. And it's also giving them small steps. And small steps, and quite often a student will become desperate because they feel that they're not progressing. And particularly if you've got a student who's going B1, B2, the intermediate plateau is enormous. And they really do feel that they're slowing down, they're not learning anything, or they're not progressing, they're not getting any better. And so that can lead them to giving up and lead them to becoming disruptive. If we show them that even though they're very small steps, they're taking steps, they're improving, we break things down enough so that they've got clear little steps, then they can keep on top, they can keep motivated because they can see these little progressions. Okay. Just a few considerations about these things to think about, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know, Mark, do you want to go through these?
Yeah, I can do. So some of the little considerations just to keep in mind. Do we make the chart public, or does each student have their record in their notebook? I mean, that's a question for you. How would you prefer to do it? I think these things can be done either way, personally. I think privacy is very good for shy learners, you know. Maybe the learner doesn't want to share. Maybe we can offer them the opportunity. Would you like it to be public, or would you like it to be private?
Also you can have different information. So if maybe you're working in groups, you might have the group chart public, but also each student would have a copy in their notebook for their own personal use. Exactly. So the personal information is theirs, and the group or the team or the class objectives are on the wall.
Yeah, that's really nice. Then that also creates a sense of community, doesn't it? It's encouraging the idea that we're in this together, you know. Yeah. One for all and all for one, as the Musketeers would say, right?
Yeah. Fuente ovejuna aquí.
So the next one then is, how do we make sure the record is significant for our students? Well, if the record doesn't have value, then it's unlikely that they're going to try and work towards it. So we have to try and think about the value of it. Where's the value going to be given? That can be the grades at the end of the year, or however you wish to do it. But as long as it has value, that is important.
Yeah, and I think that can often be achieved just with a conversation with them. Yeah, if you just give it to them and say, okay, fill this in. Quite often they'll fill it in as and when, and they'll fill it in with whatever they feel like. So it has to have a significance. They have to feel that it's important to take time on. And again, I think that's where you need to have a conversation with each student. So, you know, I need you to watch this because I need you to improve on this, this, and this. And we'll need to be sort of reviewing this maybe in a week's time, in a month's time, and so on. And you're obviously keeping a similar record, although they may not know that. Okay.
And the final one is, do we include some prize to celebrate an individual's achievement? I actually was talking to a teacher not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, actually, now I think about it, and she had a prize pot. And in this pot, she had Post-it notes, so little Post-it notes, and on the Post-it notes were little rewards for the learners, right? And one of them was, for example, I can add 0.5 to one of my grades. And so the child would pick this, they would save this, And then later on, if they got a 4.5, they could put the 0.5 and they'd get their 5. Or if they got a 9, they could get a 9.5. You know, it was a nice way of celebrating the achievement. You get a chance to get one of these little rewards. And it's not like we're doing anything wrong. We're just positively reinforcing them. I thought that was a really nice idea. Because
that's a nice idea, yeah, definitely. And it also gives them agency, because the type of prize gives them a choice of when to use it and how to apply it, and have a strategy to use it. I think that's great. I'm going to remember that one.
I thought it was a really lovely idea, and what I liked about it particularly was the idea that they can sort of what's the word? They can have like a safety blanket as well. Just with that one, for example, it was like, oh, I've got this, so I can relax a bit. It doesn't matter if I don't, and it sort of takes a bit of stress away from them as well.
It's the get out of jail free card, isn't it?
Almost, yeah, exactly.
That's great. I mean, one of the things that we could say, obviously, if an individual is keeping their progress secret, it may be difficult to give them a prize easily. But what I think you can say is that maybe there'll be a prize if the group or the class as a whole has achieved something on the public chart. You know, what's up on the wall with the public objectives. Then maybe the class can get a prize, and maybe you can take the advantage of the class getting a prize and ask the person who you want to give a prize to what prize they would like. So they're the ones who decide which prize the team gets, or which prize the class gets. So it becomes less obvious that you're giving them a prize in itself. They're participating and choosing the prize for their peers. So it's just another way of achieving the same thing, really.
Exactly. Methodist has shared in the chat box. I even gave some students the reward to become the teacher in some lessons. That always goes down well. There are some kids who just love it, and there are other kids that can't think of anything worse, right? But when you've got a kid who likes to be the teacher, who likes to be the center of attention, essentially, it's good. It's nice. I like the rewards where they get to choose. I like, for example, they get to choose the entrance music to the class. So they get to put a song on in the class while all the kids come in and get settled. That's always a popular one. Inevitably, it's going to be some reggaeton or something nowadays, but it's as long as it motivates them, well, that's good, isn't it?
Yeah. Anything goes, I think.
Nice. And so let's move on, shall we? So the other point was keep it relevant, right, David?
Yeah. So as well as making sure they understand the tools, I think I've just spoken about this a little bit. Break the objectives down into smaller steps. As I said before, it's very easy for them to become despondent and feel that they're not progressing. But if you can break the objectives down so that there's a sort of clear progression, and they can have small wins in a relatively short time period, that's enough to keep the motivation going and enough to keep them sort of learning and going forward. So again, that's another thing that we need to think about. And if we're saying, you have to know the irregular verbs, for example, you can't say that it's yes or no. You either know the irregular verbs or you don't. You might know some, but you don't know others. So there's a sort of long learning process in there. You need to break that down so that they can tick little things off on the way. Otherwise, they as I say, they can become very despondent. So we're sort of promoting success by giving them smaller steps to take, and lots of small steps actually is more effective than very few long steps, as you can see from the picture there. Okay.
That pops up now as well. Yeah, I'm breaking it down.
Yeah. So how can we break down the steps? Well, we can break it down by using can-do statements. We can break it into easy steps or sub skills. which they can master one by one. We can give them success criteria, which we'll look at in a minute. And we can give them progress charts. Our progress chart is something very similar to what we've just seen with the behavior chart. Okay, so maybe let's have a look at using can-do statements. Here, for example, we've got a set of can-do statements for B1 preliminary. It's for the speaking part. It's applied to this speaking activity where they have to speak for a minute about a photograph. And you can use this either as a teacher to assess what they can and can't do, or you can actually use it for self-assessment or for peer assessment. So this will keep coming back. If you don't use necessarily can-do statements, but you turn the rubrics that you're using into questions, then that becomes success criteria. So have you done this? Yes, success. No, not success. And again, here, I think we spoke earlier about including maybe another column here. So yes, no, sometimes, you know, I'm on the way, so that they don't always have to say no until they suddenly become perfect, because that's very demoralizing for them. And again, they need to put in comments or give examples of what they did to demonstrate that they did actually do it. So again, it's thinking critically about their own performance, or you helping them think critically about their performance by showing them where they can improve.
And also raising awareness for them of how they've done it and how they've not done it. So it's, as you said earlier, it's repeatable. They can do it again.
That's right. And again, it's looking at what success looks like. So I think we're going to have a quick look at why we should use success criteria. And the main thing is that you're making learning goals tangible and explicit and very fast. So if we share the success criteria with our learners, and I think this is something that we should be doing on a regular basis, they have a clear focus because they know what they need to do. They know what success looks like. They know what they're being measured on. They know what they need to work on in order to be measured correctly. And because they know that, they can take decisions about their own learning, and they become more independent. They don't need you to tell them whether they're right or wrong. They've got the key, they've got the information, so that they can see whether they're right or wrong before. And if they feel that they're not doing it right, they can ask to repeat it. And they're taking greater responsibility for their own learning. And at the same time, they're evaluating their progress, they're identifying their difficulties, and thinking about how they might improve. And one of the things that I like to do with this, if we've given them a piece of work, and if we've given them the success criteria they need, before they give me the piece of work, they can analyze where they feel they need help. They can tell me how they want to be assessed. They can tell me what feedback they feel they need. They can do that in lots of different ways, but they can tell me. So I can then individualize, personalize the feedback that I give them with my assessment. And that means everybody's getting what they need.
Nice. Shall I move on?
Yep. Okay. Yeah. And the last one, you know, make sure they understand the tools, break objectives down into smaller steps. Don't just celebrate the end result. Progress is much more important than the result. Effort is much more important than the result. How they get to the end is more important than the end result. Okay. So Mark, have a look at a few ideas of how we can celebrate progress.
Sure. So coming up first is the compliment jar. So put a message of thanks on a sticky note and post it in a jar for a teacher or a colleague. That is really nice to sort of, this idea, this concept is good and it can be adapted, you know. Acknowledge success, acknowledge when something's worked, being aware and being active about acknowledging it is the best way. And this can appear, this sort of idea can appear in many forms. It can be a compliment jar. It can be, for example, a board in the classroom. This is the 365 project. Like, members of the groups take photos which are collected on a board and then vote on the best one. You know, just nice ways of sharing ideas with each other, and participating in the learning process. Another one here is working on what works. This is similar, right? It's noticing and discussing the things that go well or right, rather than just what wasn't successful. And this one is a really nice one. And I think this one is really applicable to most classes. Just a moment of reflection, taking a second to think, hang on, this went well. So why? Well, Maria was really clear with the instructions, and Jose was really organized in bringing the ideas together, or whatever it is, and just being aware and acknowledging success and acknowledging that the contribution of each other. I will add on this, in my opinion, I think it's important that we help learners understand this type of feedback and this type of being aware, whether it's linguistically or conceptually, like offering them the tools to be able to say what they want to say, but also on the type of things that they could be looking for. It's just providing a bit of scaffolding can really help this task be much more successful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
the great thing about that one is it's aspirational as well, because if you identify what works, everybody then has the next step. You know, we all know that works, so let's all try and do that.
Exactly. The next one is a gratitude letter. So this is nice. This is an activity you can do, but also we could adapt it for the classroom, right? This is where you write a letter for someone who's been a positive influence and say thank you and deliver it to them. In a classroom context, maybe this one seems a bit strange, but the way it works in a beneficial way in the classroom is, why can't we say thank you to someone in the class when they've helped me do something? Or why can't we be grateful, which is a really important life skill, for being a part of a group that was successful? You know, it's again noticing success and being aware of how we can work together, and what works well for me, you know.
Yeah.
Another one, a board of thanks. This is a bit like the previous ones as well. This is post-it notes to thank peers and say thank you, as opposed to like a jar. And then the final one is a journal. So this one is possibly my favorite. I think learning journals or journals of all sorts are really beneficial. Basically, like when a teen is working or a learner is working in a group, we can write a journal. They can write a journal about the things they are proud of things that went well, and they can keep track of how the learning process went. And this kind of links into the next slide. I've actually lost a slide there, but this links into the idea of portfolios, which we'll look at in a minute.
Yes, the idea of portfolios, I'm not sure Mark is looking for the portfolio. But...
Yeah, no, it was coming up later. We'll come into that. I'm going to show the choice board first.
Okay.
I don't know where my portfolio is. We'll talk about portfolios in a second. But so this is a choice board. And this is a nice way, like before we saw the different activities of being aware of the process, we can give the learners an option of choice. So why choice? Well, choice is really beneficial because it allows the learner to take control. It allows them to be autonomous, right? And it also allows them to choose activities that are favorable to them, to what they prefer to do. Now, on the slide, you can see the task in the middle. This task is read the story for this week and finish at least 2 tasks. That is, read the task. Read the story. I mean, it depends if you're doing books, if you're doing literacy programs, or maybe it's from another subject. Maybe you've got cultura, they maybe do culture in English and they're reading a Greek mythology or whatever it is. But allow them to engage with it in a way that they want, right? I like on this, there's a really important 2 words. the most important two words on this whole slide, and that is at least. It doesn't say do two. They could do three if they wanted. They could do all of them if they wanted. If they do all of them, I'm going to be super happy, and I'm probably going to give them a big prize for that, you know, even if it's just for effort. But
or a blue sticker.
Or a blue sticker. Exactly.
Yeah, this is actually linked to the idea of portfolio assessment. So I'll pick that up in a minute if you like.
In fact, I think the next slide was going to look at. So anyway, so why choice? Just to go through some key points. Number one, it's a great way for them to learn new strategies. When we learn new strategies, we learn new processes, and then we can reflect on them to see what works well for us. Another one is it encourages them to make active choices about learning. And finally, it provides opportunities for reflection. So again, even though this is not the end goal of the task, maybe the story, we're going to do a presentation on it later, or a bigger thing in class. This is part of the understanding and learning process. It gives them the opportunity to reflect. And for those of you who are aware that mediation is a term that's coming into secondary school more and more, this table here, this grid, actually offers the opportunity for learners to develop a range of mediation subskills. By that, I mean summarizing, reviewing, putting chronologically information, taking an idea and sharing it with someone else. These are all different subskills of mediation. So again, we're learning English through mediation. We're offering them a chance of a space to be able to evaluate. Nice. And moving on, we get to portfolio assessment.
Okay. So yeah, portfolio assessment, there's not a massive amount to say about it, because as I say, it's not something that is naturally done here very much. I remember when I was studying for my English O-level, shows I'm very, very old because O-levels don't exist anymore. But I had to select a certain number of pieces of classwork which I wanted to be included in my final assessment. So I was given a series of pieces of work to do, and I had to build a portfolio of what I considered to be my best and most representative work. So building on the idea of giving students choice, as teachers, we're providing with lots of pieces of work on which they can be assessed. We're providing them with lots of homework, we're providing them with class tests, we're providing them with pieces of writing, speaking activities, and so on. Ideally, we should be able to give our students the choice of which pieces of work they want to present as part of their final grade, even if it's just the final grade for the term. Yes, they have to do the end of term exam, but which pieces of work are they happy with? Are they proud of, which they've done during the course of the year? They can select those. We need to give them guidelines, of course. They can't choose 10 irregular verb tests, which they did really well on. They have to include a piece of speaking. They have to include a piece of listening. They have to introduce a piece which was a collaborative task. They have to have a piece of writing, for example. And then within all of the pieces of work that they've done during the term, they select according to those criteria and they present those. And they're taking responsibility for their own assessment. I want to be assessed on this because I'm happy with this. It doesn't mean they can't do the rest. It doesn't mean that they only do one piece of good writing at the beginning of the term and then don't hand in any more writing. They can try and game the system as much as they want, but as long as we give them those guidelines, we give them those parameters, it's really important for students, and particularly if we're talking about teenagers, it's really, really important for them to feel that they own their own destiny, they own their own assessment, rather than you choosing everything for them. Okay, you really do need to sort of give them the reins a little bit and say, okay, you decide. I would have chosen that one, but hey, you chose this one. You got a worse mark, but you decide.
If it's the one they're most proud of, well, why can't they? I mean, it's obviously they can choose what they want to choose. Another really nice thing about this is also it helps avoid having a bad day. Some kids just have bad days in exams. It happens to all of us, and we don't give our best representation of ourselves. The portfolio sort of almost eliminates that to a sense, doesn't it? It gives all learners a equal and fair opportunity to give the best representation of themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
Not down to one specific moment.
Okay, let's press on to peer assessment. Oh, sorry, self-assessment is the next one. Let's run through this quite quickly because I'm sure we're all reasonably aware of what self-assessment is. It's another very important skill because it involves a lot of reflection and a lot of critical thinking, but it's also quite difficult to do in class. And a lot of teachers I know try it once and then give up because it was chaos. If you do it once, it's chaos, always. If you do it twice, it's chaos. If it becomes part of the classroom culture, if it becomes part of what is normal for them to do in class, it's an incredibly useful tool. It's an incredibly important tool. So the first thing you need to do is just take some time and explain why it is useful. And the whole set of reasons about this. It's useful because it's involving critical thinking. It's useful because it makes them learn how to learn. So again, we're going back into that sort of competency area. And so on. So take some time, talk to them, and explain how it's going to work for them. Also, scaffold it. A halfway house, you can also lean on peer assessment. Sometimes students find it very difficult to assess their own work critically, but they are able to see problems with other people's work. And so it sounds very biblical, actually. I'm sure there's a reference there somewhere. But, students find it easier to see mistakes in other people's work than in their own. So give them the chance to look at other people's work and to support their peers by giving constructive feedback on their work, and then come back to their own work and look at the constructive feedback they've received and see why they've been given that feedback. And that's sort of also linked into making it a structured process. Give them rubrics, give them structures, give them checklists, give them all sorts of things. The last thing is make time for it. They can't do it naturally on the bus. They will do if they get into the habit, but you've got to teach them how to do it. And the only way to teach them how to do it is make time for it. Because it has benefits in the long run, it's worth investing time in class. And also do it yourself. Engage, show them that you're engaging in self-assessment. If you make a mistake on the board and then correct it, oh, there's a mistake there. And maybe they can peer assess you. I'm sure they'll probably peer assess you quicker than you can see it. But again, just draw their attention to moments when you're self-assessing and rectifying maybe, and make a show of it so that they can see that everybody does it. Okay, so we just
wanted to add, as long as you make it natural, it's natural and frequent, it's going to be productive. It really does work like that.
Lots of different tools that you can use here for a self-assessment. The most basic, which I think for maybe secondary is a little bit too basic, is the traffic light. So the student gives them red or amber or green. Notice there's always more than two options. So there's not just that sort of yes/no dichotomy. There's always a in process, sometimes, maybe, when I feel like it. I'm not quite there yet. But again, they don't have to go from 0 to perfection. We've got the can-do statements again in the checklist, and then we've got a couple of writing frames for them where they can vocalize or write down, maybe in their journals, the sort of things that they find easy or difficult or more time-consuming or whatever. Okay, so this is just the scaffolding for them to be able to not have to worry about the language. And I think even here, they could even self-assess in Spanish if they find it difficult in English. It's not a linguistic activity. It's an activity about their learning.
The more aware the more scaffolded it is, the more we encourage them to, or give them the tools, the more likely they are to go and do it for themselves, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Another example, one that I like is record cards. So these are just little cards. I mean, you could do them however you want. You could do them at the back of the books, or you could even have features, you know, study cards, we call them in English, right? Or they're called study cards, I think we call them. Yeah. So these are just nice little cards that they can build up over the course of a year or a term or whatever it is, by saying how they can do different parts of their learning. This can be a competence. This could be part of the basic knowledge, the language, the content of the course. It could be anything. But the point is, we want them to build up a reference of achievements. And this is a bit like a portfolio in a sense. It's, you know, it's kind of showing how over the period, a sustained period, I'm doing well. And it's very good if you do them on features. It's a really nice tool because they see the cards getting bigger and bigger and more, you know, and that visual reminder of progress is there because they see more and more cards over a longer period.
I was thinking maybe if they get 10 cards, they can give it to the teacher and get a stamp.
There you go.
You get 5 stamps, then they get a prize. You know, so there's sort of positive reinforcement being built in to make them understand that they are progressing.
It's also really, that is also an element of gamification. You're offering progress, achievements, rewards for progress. It's a nice technique. I quite like that, actually. Yeah. Another point to mention is the use of assessment grids. So on the screen, this is a competence evaluation grid. This is for the teacher, really, showing the different competencies from LOMLOE and the sub-skills that are needed to be achieved. Okay, and sort of using these tools and sharing this with the learners helps them understand what they need to be doing. You know, it can be used in class. We can adapt them to can-do statements, you know, but also the great thing about this is you could maybe create the similar one for the learners. Like David mentioned smiley faces. I think smiley faces are good at any age group, early secondary, early primary, late secondary. I think they're a fun way to like, what's the word, to...
It's a very easy way to reflect what the idea.
Yeah.
So happy face, yes, I've achieved it. Sort of neutral face, I'm sort of achieving it. And sad face or angry face, try again. Which is something that came up last week and everybody liked. It's not, no, I can't do it. It means I've got to have another go. Sonia Lagunas mentioned earlier that it's difficult to judge or to assess aspects of competency objectively. This is the answer, the rubric.
Okay. If we just zoom into one example, we have this C3, which is the mathematics, science, and technology competence, right? I put this one here just to highlight that when we talk about maths in English, we're not talking about learning maths. We're talking about problem solving. We're talking about evaluating options and justifying its mathematical thought, right? So we can evaluate that. That is something we can evaluate. I have justified I have chosen to do this because, and this was a solution to this because, you know, it's a way of offering the learners to be able to reflect on it and demonstrate that they are achieving. And they're evaluating themselves. And at the end of the day, we can see their comments and say, yes, you have, yes, you have, yes, you have. I think this is okay. Maybe you could do this better. You know, we're helping them to become the best learner they can be. And I think that's kind of like an important thing. And the final one to mention here is that one is for the teachers. That's for our record. We could modify it, but there are also options like this. You know, this is a competence, all about the digital competence here. Okay. And this is a way for the learners to reflect and think about what they've done, how they did it, and what I could do the next time. It's kind of a process of recognizing, accepting, and then planning. It's a real nice tool for them to go through. Just to mention, these two documents, these 2 pages you've seen, these are part of the evaluation pack that Cambridge has put together for reference. So these you'll notice on the Cambridge Teacher, for those of you who are using our courses, you'll be able to find these shortly available to you. Probably by the end of the year, you'll see them there. And
yeah, I think we've really spoken quite a lot about reflection with these cards, actually. So I think we can probably skip through this. But it is very important within peer reflection to, within peer assessment, it is all a question of reflection. So we need to give our students tools to be able to reflect. And I think the ones that Mark has just shown you are very good ones for that to share with them.
Nice. Yeah. So again, we've mentioned this already. We've just looked at reflecting on learning very quickly. I bring all these up for you.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is basically just thinking about how to make your learners aware of the learning process. So this is really a sort of maybe a Friday afternoon session with your students after the week's work, where you just ask them to remember what you did and how the lessons went from one to the next, and try and identify the reasons behind the learning, the reasons behind what you did. Okay, and hopefully that's making them aware of the structure will allow them to understand that, you know, we didn't just play a game, we played the game because whatever. Okay, so it's just very, very quickly running through reflection, because I'm aware that time is
I just want to quickly address a comment that Carmen has made to David and myself. I'll just read it out. She agrees with the way to assess the progress of the student, but using rubrics for every single aspect you have to evaluate multiplied by the number of learners. It could seem like an impossible target. And I don't disagree with you. It is, and it does seem like a lot. That's why I think what we're trying to show in this session is there are a lot of strategies where assessment is not solely down to us. Assessment can be peer, it can be self, it can be in the form of portfolios. You can look at the bigger picture in a variety of ways. And in fact, we're going to look at an example in a second about how we can integrate different competencies into one task so you can evaluate them all at once, more or less. Okay, I'll show you those in a second. In fact, I think it's now, isn't it?
No, it's just a final reflection, this one.
So this one was just also one way of integrating reflection quite simply in class is by reflecting on the objectives of the class. This is just a box from the start of a unit, which tells you the objectives of the unit. We could ask them at the beginning to say what they know about these and then get them to reflect on the end on how well they feel they have completed them. This is like a nice little simple, easily integratable reflection task, encouraging them to be aware of their learning to learn, like their self-awareness. No?
Yeah, that's right. So again, I would just skip through this because peer assessment takes a lot of the same forms as self-assessment. It's just applied on somebody else's work. The key thing for this is respect. So they need to learn to respect their peers in the way that they do the assessment. But really, I think it's more interesting to spend the time we've got left on this last section.
Nice. Yeah, so this is what I was mentioning, Carmen. So in the terminology of LOMLOE, I'm sure you've heard the term evaluaciones. I've forgotten the name.
Situaciones de aprendizaje.
Thank you ever so much, David. Situaciones de aprendizaje.
I've only just learned it. So.
Yeah. So situaciones de aprendizaje, they are learning situations in English. These are situations where we can see and learners can demonstrate the different competencies in action. That is, for example, it is basically a big project. To put it really simply, it develops autonomy. It allows them to take responsibility. It encourages them to be aware of their self-knowledge and also offer them by offering them the opportunities of self-reflection. What's really nice is it permits us as teachers to integrate a flipped classroom approach if that is something that we are interested in doing. So it doesn't necessarily have to take up an excessive amount of classroom time. It integrates all 4 skills, which is obviously really interesting for us. And it also allows for the use of self and peer evaluation. As you can see, a situación de aprendizaje, or a learning situation, is a great opportunity for us to apply various models of evaluation and assessment. Okay. Oh, sorry. And finally, it also allows the learners to personalize and therefore increase motivation. What does it look like? Well, here is an example of one. Okay, this is one that we've put together at Cambridge. This will be available for you on the Cambridge Teacher. You'll have access to this if you're using our materials. But the general idea is it is a big project, okay, which has several stages which focus on different competencies. Okay, so in this one, it's storytellers. The students are going to create a joint storyboard, and in the end, they're going to create a video or a short film for their classmates. Short film can be as long as you want, as short as you want, okay? But if you look at the steps along the way, you'll see that they are allowing us to integrate the different competencies. The first one is the storyboard. So this is a communication stage. The next one, they give options, select from the terms of beginnings, plots, endings, characters, and roles. We're talking about entrepreneurship here. This is all about creative thinking, critical thinking. The next stage, input from the teacher, they create a story and production plan. Okay, so this is filming, editing, etc. This is all digital competence. The next stage, they receive critical feedback in the form of a film review. So this is learning to learn. This is group learning, social learning, and it's also working on the different skills. And then finally, we have the content is shared on online space with group students from other classes around the world, for example. Again, sort of that digital competence and being responsible for their learning. So you can see this is a very simple run here. It's nothing exceptionally innovative, is it really? I mean, we've seen creating videos in classes before. The only difference is we're aware of the different stages here. I was going to ask you to share 2 ways you could adapt this, integrate it into your class. Or maybe I think I would prefer we just answer the second one here. Share at least one, for one, funny typo, you always catch one. Share at least one way you could encourage reflection. Okay, so if you would, in the chat box, have a look at the different stages and think about one moment in this run of activities where you could integrate reflection. Give me a few seconds to type while we brace the webinar silent. do think these projects, as it were, are really great, you know. They're really nice ways of being able to just cover so many areas in such a short period, you know. Short period, I mean, we could do this over the period of a term, and we've ticked off all the boxes, you know, all the boxes of all the different competencies, etc. Let's see if anyone's going to be brave and share an opportunity. I'm going to give some examples in a second if nothing's coming to mind. That's fine. In fact, being aware of the time, I'm going to jump into those examples now. Please do keep writing in the chat box if you feel to write them, and I'll come back to them in a second. Yeah, Maria Teresa, during the editing, for example, we could take a moment and reflect back specifically on that. One really useful tools are KWL charts, know, want to know, learned, or learned. Yeah, so these are a classic reflection tool that allows the learners to think about what they're doing, about what they need to do, and then after we've completed the task, what they have learned. So this one could be used at various stages. It should be used before, during, and after. And this one here, this is quite a generic one, but you can create it more specifically to the project you're working on. You know, what do I know about the topic? What are our tasks? Want to know, what do I want to know about this topic? And then at the end, now know or know now. What do we know now about the topic? What do we know now about the tasks? And what can we do as a group? So again, you're getting them to reflect on what they've learned as a group, how they work together, how they could work again in the future. All within one form that's just comes back to several times, you know?
It's nice that there's a space there for awareness of the actual process and awareness of the task itself. Because although you might find the focus is often the content, the focus is often the topic, but the sort of the meta learning and the learning how to do a certain type of task is really important. Sure. And so just by making them aware of it, so maybe you have to write an essay. So what do you know about essays? What do you already know? What are you bringing to the class about essays? And maybe you're going to learn something new about writing an essay later on. So, you know, at the end, I now know in an essay that we have to do this and this and this, and it's better to do this based on this piece of work. So it's not all about the learning things. It's developing competencies, developing abilities.
Developing the process, isn't it? It's all about developing that process. Here's a couple of other examples of forms you could use as a teacher. Really, this is here just to highlight that you don't have to evaluate all competencies at once. Okay, you can evaluate 3, 2, 1, 5, whatever you feel necessary. Okay, whether it's too much or too little, just know you have to evaluate the competencies over the year, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, in the first term, you might do 3. In the second term, you might do 3. And in the third trimester, you might do the remaining ones. Yeah. Okay, so it's all about just sort of organizing, structuring, and just making sure your learners are aware of what you're looking for, and making it clear, and making it measurable, and making it accessible to them.
Yeah, this when you're planning your activities, you're planning your course as well. Bear in mind, you know, this is an opportunity to practice or to evaluate this competency. Mm-hmm. is just part of your planning. So, okay, we're going to learn about this, we're going to do it via this, and this will involve this, this, and this competency. So here we're going to evaluate particularly this aspect of this competency, because that's what appears, that's what the activity lends itself to.
Sure, yeah, and Dolores, I agree with you. Getting some students' feedback. Yeah, I think getting students' feedback about everything is really important, because it gives them the sense, and in reality, it makes them part of the process, not just recipients. And the more we make them part of the process, the more likely, not guaranteed, but the more likely they are to want to be a part of the process, be a part of the learning.
Yeah. Also, and we do run the risk as teachers of teaching into what we think is a vacuum. And you might be surprised that you're teaching students things that they already know, or at least that some of them already know. And if some of them already know it, then you can use them as a resource, again, to take the weight off you as a teacher, to share the teaching load, and to engage the students more. If they can see that they have a colleague or a classmate who's engaged, they're more likely to do it than if you are. Particularly, again, if they're teens.
Yep. Nice. This is just another one. We could also do forms like this: peer evaluation. How well did they work in the preparation stage, the development stage, and the production stage? Here's an example of those smiley faces. They can say what went well, what went wrong, what didn't go so well, sorry. And at the bottom, we can encourage them to not only just say how well they did it, but give some examples of things that worked well, and also plans of action maybe for the next project they work on, or the next situación de aprendizaje, the next learning situation. How can your group work better in the next project? Now, I will add here, these are really, really useful as reflections at the end of a project, for example, but they're also really useful as references at the beginning of the next project. Come back to these pages and say, look, do you remember what went on in your last project? What were you going to do this time? How would you like to improve it? How would you like to do better? Just making sure they're aware of their previous learning, because let's be honest, we fill out pieces of paper a lot and they can go missing in backpacks. They can get stuffed in folders at home. You're never going to see them again. But if we make an active point of coming back to these types of pages, it adds value. And when we have value, we're probably going to get more chance that the learner is going to want to listen to them or to use them. And that just leaves on to thinking about when to do evaluation. Well, you can do it in the preparation, or you could do it in the development, or you could do it in the production. You could do it all the way along from beginning through to end. Just also to highlight, we do have some the learning cards, study cards, that are linked to competencies. This is an example of them. We'll share the link in the chat box potentially in a minute or at the end. So these are specific cards linked to developing specific competencies. There are tasks. This one here, for example, is looking at taking control of own learning. So this is mistakes ladders. This is a nice activity about helping the learners to manage emotions. Another one is the extended KWL chart. So we saw a KWL chart. Well, this one takes it a step further. Not just what do I know, what do I want to know, what did I learn, but how did I learn it and how well did it go? So we can take them a step further, can't we? We can do more in that task. A couple of others to come up. You have fridge, suitcase, bin. I like this one a lot. Fridge is something you want to keep and use again later. Suitcase is something you'll take to you and use frequently. And bin is something that didn't work, so we won't use it again. So this is kind of a nice way to visualize learning strategies that work for the learner. And next one is everything but the text. So this is just strategies for comprehension. Well, I'm showing you and reading you them. Really, it's best if you go download the pack. It's really, really useful. We'll get that link to you in a second. Okay.
Yeah, I don't have the link, unfortunately. So
okay, I may.
Or I might have it on the desktop. Yeah.
I don't know if you can. You see the presentation or?
Yeah.
Okay, 1 second. I can get hold of it here.
It's just a really easy URL as well.
It's one of these ones. It's coming in the chat box now. Oh, that's actually for the young learners. But if you go to this website, I'll get it to you in a second. I'll find the actual link in a second for you. This links into what is our life competencies framework. Okay, the life competencies framework is the home for all of Cambridge competencies. These are not the same name as the ones in the LOMLOE. They are the competencies that we base our courses on. They link directly to LOMLOE, and we have lots of resources there showing you where and how they cross over. So this framework is the most developed framework you're going to see in English language teaching. It has activities, it has can-do statements, it has suggestions, there's research, there's so much behind it. We really recommend you have a look at the Cambridge Life Competencies framework.